Welcome to Writing Westward. My name is West, and today we're talking about Spider-Man No Way Home and how it aged. Many people have already said that this movie's aged poorly, and to that I agree. But compared to the other two movies in the series, Doctor Strange 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine, this movie is easily the best of the worst. I think this movie is aged the best compared to those two, which I know isn't a very high bar, but still. And the reason I think that is because this movie is actually two movies in a trench coat pretending to be one movie. And one of those movies is pretty good. And the other of those movies is not suited for aging well, if that makes sense. That being said, do I think this movie is perfect? Absolutely not. Do I think it's bad or aged like milk, as the thumbnail may or may not say, depending on if I change it? No, not really. I don't think it aged as poorly as milk, but there are definitely some cracks that are showing much more now than they were on first viewing back in 2021 or whenever this thing came out. Ultimately, I think all of this movie's flaws are symptoms of one central weakness, and that weakness is that this movie has an identity crisis, and it's at war with itself. It's stepping on its toes, and it's a whole thing. So I said No Way Home is two movies in a trench coat pretending to be one movie. So what exactly are those two movies that are both in a trench coat and at war with each other? I don't know, the metaphors are getting muddled, but you get the point, or I hope you do anyway. The first of these sub-2 films is a movie committed to fan service, cameos, and audience reactions moments. This is where I'm something of a scientist myself, and the power of the sun in the palm of my hand live, This is where Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire stepping through the portal and just standing there waiting for the audience to applause live, right? And the second movie is the most classic type of Spider-Man story. It's the story where they make Peter's life miserable, utterly miserable, to teach him lessons about responsibility and what it means to be Spider-Man. And that movie's also like the emotional core and the heart of the movie. On their own, both of these sub-movies have merit, though there is definitely one that aged better. The cameo movie was fun, the audience reactions were electric, it definitely felt like a more tasteful celebration of the cinematic Spider-Man mythos than, say, Deadpool and Wolverine or Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. But while these cameos weren't nearly as egregious as their counterparts in Doctor Strange 2, for example, they still suffer from some of the rewatchability issues. The punch and novelty of these characters showing up is severely undercut once you know that they're going to be there, when they're going to be there, and how they're going to be there, right? But I'll talk more about that in a minute. For now, let's move on to the second sub-film, Fighting for Screen Time. This is the beating heart of the story. It's concerned with Peter's growth and journey as Spider-Man, and it's also the reason this film didn't age as poorly as something like Deadpool and Wolverine. The plotline has its flaws, but honestly, most of them only exist because of the other movie Marvel stuffed in there to get people to point at the screen and say, "I remember that guy! This is awesome!" Let's talk about some of those flaws. Most of them originate from the movie stepping on its own toes. First, let's start with the pacing issues. The movie does a surprisingly good job of creating tension and building up to emotional moments, but it's all undercut by the applause breaks left in the movie for audiences to shake and piss their pants when they see Doc Ock saying, "The power of the sun in the palm of my hand," or something. Don't get me wrong, I was in the theater shaking and pissing my own pants when that was happening, just like everyone else, but it's really, really noticeable on rewatch, and it kind of took me out of it. And Doc Ock says, "The power of the sun in my hand, in my palm," line twice, and Norman Osborn says, "I'm something of a scientist myself," and then the characters just stare at them, waiting, before speaking, like they know that there's an audience that's supposed to clap at those lines, and they're just waiting for it. And it's kind of awkward and undercuts a lot of build-up and emotional stakes and just a lot of the flow of the movie. Speaking of emotional stakes, one of the things that irked me a lot on a rewatch was the whiplash this movie constantly put the audience through. This is kind of a microcosm of what I meant when I said the movie was at war with itself. Like, it can't focus on a consistent emotional through line to save its life, right? In the beginning, it's more like fun, campy, that's fine, but towards the third act, like, let me just walk you through some scenes that happen one after the other. First, we have Green Goblin brutally murdering Aunt May, and then she dies in Peter's arms, and he's like torn up over it, and it's brutal. And then we immediately go to Ned's apartment, where it's like, oh hey, neat, he accidentally summoned Toby and Andrew, and MJ's gonna throw bread at Andrew because she doesn't believe he's Spider-Man. Oh haha, this is so neat, so fun. Much wow. And then we go to the rooftop scene with Tom Holland Spider-Man, and the other two Spider-Men are there, having a very deep emotional conversation about loss, revenge, how they became bitter, and how he should avoid that. And they're talking about their stories and past, and it's very like, it's heavy, and it's a good moment. And then we go immediately from that to the lab scene, which, you know, has some joking around in it. Then they're at the Statue of Liberty, and they're doing the whole, Toby, your webs are organic? That's crazy. You have organic webbing? And they're like doing all the banter, which is like cool and fun on its own. But in the context of this movie, they're prepping for a battle that should be highly tense and emotional with the guy who just killed Aunt May, right? Like, it's fine, but imagine how much more they could have built to this if they didn't feel the need to put in these like cameo fan service moments where they ended up being, right? And then of course we do have the emotional fight between Green Goblin and Tom Holland, and it works really well. There are some touching moments that I really liked from like the cameo movie in this final battle. For instance, Andrew Garfield saving MJ was awesome because he couldn't save Gwen in that same way, and that was a big moment. And then by the same token, Tobey Maguire got to save Norman Osborn from Tom Holland's Spider-Man, which he wasn't able to save Norman before. So that was a really nice moment as well, right? But all of this like emotional buildup and intensity is really kind of undercut by the emotional whiplash the movie throws you through, because it's got to balance the like plot line with Tom Holland's Peter Parker that's like emotional and in-depth, and it's really like, you know, it's kind of dark, with the fun and goofy, look at all these cameos, isn't this awesome, don't you remember these guys? And it constantly has to oscillate between those two like things, and it's kind of hard to do. The movie pulls it off better than I think a lot of other stuff would, but it's still noticeable on watching like later, right? And then of course there's the convoluted plot line, which also only exists so the movie can have its cake and eat its too. Like, everyone's talked about how crazy it is that Peter doesn't get into college, so his first recourse for that, his first course of action is to go to Doctor Strange and ask for help brainwashing the entire world, which is a memory spell. Doctor Strange says it's a memory spell that somehow rips open the multiverse, which doesn't really make much sense, but whatever. And then it's so out of character for Peter and Doctor Strange, both who have been shown to be heroic and like responsible in this universe, to do something so like stupid, you know? Like, why'd they do this? And Doctor Strange tries to put it on Peter. He's like, your first action is like, dude, you're a grown man. Like, this was a bad idea, and you knew that. You knew that. Like, maybe you're the one that needs to learn with great power comes responsibility, to be honest. Through that, you know, that story eventually interweaves with Peter's story to have, like, the cameos be a part of his arc, right? Because Aunt May says, like, you have the power to help them, you have the responsibility to help. And he tries, and it's curing them, and that's cool. But then when you think about it, it doesn't really hold up. Like, someone pointed out that Green Goblin, like, they cure him, great, they send him back to his universe, he probably sees the glider coming straight for his chest to think, oh shit, before he then dies, right? All of these villains or taken out of their universe seconds before death. The movie makes a point of that. That's very important to the plot. So essentially what Peter is doing is depowering them, mostly, with the exception of like Doc Ock, I guess, and then sending them back to die. He didn't really change anything if you think about it, right? The movie acts like he did, but it's not really, he doesn't really feel responsible when you think about it. And responsibility is something that Peter doesn't have in this movie. He's so selfish, which is fine for a new Spider-Man, but in Civil War, it's implied that he's already learned with great power comes great responsibility, right? He says,
look, when you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
Which is like rephrased with great power comes great responsibility, but they kind of throw that out the window for this movie. And I saw someone say, which is crazy but true, that Aunt May died because Peter didn't want to go to community college, which is just an insane read on the movie, but I'm just cackling at how accurate it is. Listen to me cackle. I'll probably cut that. I don't know. This movie has a lot of flaws, and it's just... It's because it wants to be two separate movies, right? And those two separate movies are like fighting for screen time. And I will give it this. Doctor Strange 2 kind of wanted to be two separate movies in the same way, but they just allocated like 90% of the runtime to like the cameo fest and the cool like multiverses and all this crazy stuff. And there wasn't anything left for the characters. This movie did better than that. This movie does have like stuff going on, like character development, character-wise. And in Deadpool and Wolverine, it's not. I can't even give it that. I think Deadpool and Wolverine is the worst of these three movies on rewatch. Although Doctor Strange 2 is kind of coming up on there too. Anyway, some of my thoughts. I'm a YouTuber. You know what I want? Do the things if you feel like it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.